Good afternoon, and welcome to Foley and Lardner's webinar series, The Comeback, Sports in a Worldwide Pandemic, Part 1, The Business of Sports.
Thank you, Mary. I'm Bob Dupay, a partner in our New York office of Foley, and on behalf of the sports and entertainment industry team at Foley and Lardner, I want to welcome you to the first in a series of monthly webinars on sports coming back from the pandemic, a series moderated by sports media guru Rick Horrow and featuring a broad and diverse set of industry leaders who will talk about what it has been like dealing with the virus and what it'll be like going forward as we all work our way out of the horrors of the past year. By sharing best practices and generating new ideas, hopefully we can make it a little bit easier for everyone. I'm joined in my introduction by the co-chairs of our sports group, John Israel, who is officed in New York, is a labor and employment attorney by practice and formerly was with the NBA, and Kevin Schultz, a corporate partner in our Milwaukee office, who has been with the firm his entire career and has been involved in numerous team, league, stadium, and sponsorship transactions throughout his career. They will be back at the end of the hour. We're all very grateful to you for watching and thankful to the wonderful group of panelists who are willing to give of their time and experiences to help us all. The importance of sports on the national landscape cannot be overstated. And coming out of every national trauma, sports has played a role in the national recovery. Whether it be President Roosevelt telling Commissioner Landis to play Major League Baseball in 1942 after Pearl Harbor, as the U.S. became involved in World War II as a way of providing a diversion to the ravages and emotions of war, or the very moving Army-Navy football game played only 2 weeks after the Kennedy assassination and dedicated to the fallen commander-in-chief, or the response of MLB and the NFL to the ghastly attack on our country on 9/11. The wearing of FDNY and NYPD hats by the players when they came back was certainly a healing tribute, and of course, no one will ever forget President Bush throwing out probably the most famous first pitch ever at Game 3 of the 2001 World Series on October 30 in Yankee Stadium, just before the Eagle Challengers soared in from center field. But the comeback here and the role of sports is unique in our history. Sports thrives in an environment and with behavior that has been forced to be restricted these past months to help in the prevention of the disease. Loud, boisterous crowds packed into stadia and arenas, long lines to get into ballparks and at the concession stands, the interaction between the players and the fans, the Lambeau Leap, courtside seats, the infield at Churchill Downs, high fives on the way into the tunnel. How can sports get back to that or present its equivalent to recreate the magic that only competition with an uncertain outcome can create? Professional and student athletes are the spirit of their communities and campuses. Will it soon be the same? And if so, how? That is what we hope to explore over the next several months. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce the moderator of this series, my longtime friend, sports media author, media personality, and Harvard Law graduate, Rick Horrow. Rick is the author of, among other books, The Sports Business Handbook, Insights from 100+ Leaders Who Shaped 50 Years in the Industry, Beyond the Box Score, and When the Game is on the Line, all about sports deal making. I can think of no better person to lead us on this journey. Rick, over to you.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you to the sports entertainment industry team at Foley and Lardner. It is a really exciting opportunity to go through the comeback of the industry in monthly increments. Hopefully it's entertaining and we'll be able to learn something along the way. Last March 11, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic. Within sports on that date, otherwise known as the day that sports stood still, the National Basketball Association shut down its entire operation when Utah Jazz player Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19 right before the tip of the Jazz game that night in Oklahoma City. The NBA announcement dovetailed with the Big Ten shutting down its conference basketball championships mid-game and the subsequent cancellation of all March Madness. Soon, baseball's spring training, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer, and youth sports followed suit, leaving America's sportless and play-by-play teams speechless. To add insult to sports injury, actor Tom Hanks, he of the A-League of their own, announced that he and his wife Rita Wilson had tested positive for the coronavirus while filming in Australia. And of course, we all thought this would be a short interlude, maybe a month or two, and boy, were we wrong. By the summer, the $1.3 trillion business of sports had experienced turbulence never before seen, and the COVID-19 pandemic had caused the most significant disruption to the global sporting calendar since World War II. The 2020 Summer Olympics in Tokyo were rescheduled to 2021, shuttered Wimbledon, enacted its force majeure insurance. Until play resumed, the NBA faced an estimated $1 billion to $1.7 billion lost in ticket revenue and concession sales, media rights, and merchandise for last season. And prior to the shutdown, the NHL was projected to make $5 billion in revenue for the first time. Since then, NHL teams were projected to make an estimated 1.3 million per game loss from ticketing, concession, and advertising revenue. And in all, an analysis conducted by ESPN last May pegged the vanishing of sports in the U.S. alone at a price tag of over $12 billion. This surreal scenario saw approximately 1.3 million sports jobs furloughed, reduced, or erased entirely. Economic modeler EMSI estimated that sports occupations could lose a total of over $12 billion in earnings by mid-last June. It's an average of 133 million in earnings every day, but 92 grand per second, per minute, a lot. As we reach the horrific one-year anniversary of the pandemic that, according to the CDC, has caused over 28 million cases in the U.S., resulting at this point over 517,000 deaths and over 116 million cases and 2.5 million deaths globally, we have to view the pandemic in life-altering historical terms. Most important, we can view the historical perspective of a comeback from unprecedented panoramic disaster. We can confidently look forward to a 21st century roaring 20s, a new roaring 20s, thanks to what we know about the last one. The 20th century version of the roaring 20s followed a global pandemic, and the pent-up demand to gather again fueled economic expansion, both globally and specifically with respect to mass entertainment forms and venues, including the establishment of the golden age of sports. The easing of the pandemic that took about 675,000 lives 100 years ago can be credited with the remarkable attendance records quickly established in baseball and boxing, and the building of new venues for gathering, from ballparks like Yankee Stadium to movie palaces across the nation. The 21st century roaring 20s will be the same and different altogether. We return to gathering, though perhaps more deliberately, given the science we know about today. And what's different is we have the venues that'll facilitate this that we didn't have many of before. And for what occasions we will gather may be different this time around. We'll have many more options from which to choose, including burgeoning new opportunities such as esports and more opportunities than ever on and off the field for women and minorities. Just over 100 years later, we can begin to see some positive impacts on the sports world. First, creativity born out of necessity. Facing the inability to hold live events, sports leagues and media partners explored options to mitigate lost TV revenue, typically the primary source of any given league's revenue, granting additional rights and making goods and extending existing agreements. Second, best practices born out of natural selection. Roger Goodell doing the NFL draft from his basement proved to be a surprisingly good television component last year. And we look forward to this year's remote NFL draft as well. And after 2 years, NFL fans and the athletes themselves may well be reprogrammed to experience the draft as a remote live event on a permanent basis. Only time will tell. Third, unprecedented sharing and cooperation born out of the theme that sports is in it together. And finally, those unbelievable cardboard cutouts, which will live with us forever. Through the Sport Business Handbook, insights with 100 plus leaders who shaped 50 years of the industry, we have the benefit of 50 years of the history of the sports business that'll guide us moving forward. I'd like to commend Professor Stephen Gracer, who helped me on this effort, who I know is viewing today as well. We'll have perspectives from commissioners, owners, doctors, athletes, sponsors, media executives, and all those whose opinions we value. Our topics will focus on many items during the series. Facility reopening, building and expanding asset values, media and broadcast rights, esports, real estate, college sports, tourism and hospitality, and other thought-provoking issues. Our hope is to create a monthly franchise that identifies future trends, provides insight and thought-provoking analysis from industry opinion leaders, and gives us insight into how to appropriately focus on the next 50 years. The global pandemic has been a major life-changing event for all concerned. Hopefully, this series might allow us to move forward well-educated and better prepared to meet future challenges. Let's begin. I'd like to start, Bob, by talking with you for a couple of minutes about some of these issues. You're a Dartmouth guy, Cornell Law School guy, president and CEO of Major League Baseball from 2002 to 2010, basically covered the waterfront. So I'll put the first question to you. What is it about the power of sports that allows it to play a really significant historical role in coming back from what you point out is a major national trauma? Why is it so powerful?
For COO, not CEO, but thank you for the introduction. I truly think it's one of the things I mentioned, and that is the uncertainty of the outcome and the hold that has on people. Obviously, first and foremost, it's the talent and the skill and the unbelievable athleticism of all the athletes across all of the sports. But the uncertainty outcome really does play in terms of popularity. It's why the Academy Awards show was always so popular. It's why 50 years ago the Miss America pageant was the highest rated television show on television. It's why reality shows do so well. But when you have the athletes and you have the rooting interest, whether it's by country in the Olympics or by city with regard to the various major leagues, or whether it's by college, everybody has a little bit of ownership in it. And now with the addition of the gambling possibilities, it's really no surprise that sports plays the type of role that it plays, and why every media outlet, whether it be newspaper, radio station, television station, has a separate sports section every day.
Well, and to follow up on that, I referred to the new Roaring Twenties, which is ironic that it's basically 100 years after the old one. 675,000 Americans tragically perished in the Spanish flu epidemic. Who knows how many will by the end of this count. We've established that Yankee Stadium and boxing and fans were a consequence of some of the recovery as well. And by the way, just a news tip, a minute ago, the House just passed the $1.9 billion COVID Relief Act. That'll be signed, which now opens up the next step, which might be Build Back Better, which is infrastructure. We'll talk about that during our next seminar on April 14. But can you predict from your own perspective the Roaring Twenties relative to sports, the new ones, as vaccines carry the day?
There clearly is a pent-up demand for live sport entertainment. You saw that with spring training games, the limited capacity, but the spring training games selling out in a matter of hours. The real change from the last Roaring Twenties, I think, is the number of constituencies that now have to be considered and given weight as everyone tries to come back. The safety of the players, the safety of the fans, government from federal to state to local, vendor relationships, media relationships, sponsor activation. All of those are clearly going to play a role. But hopefully, as people get vaccinated and as people get more comfortable, resuming normal activity, one of the first things they're going to want to do is participate in outdoor sport activity and indoor sport activity.
I think we may have been around to shepherd in 50 years of the sports business years ago, maybe you and me. And we always thought that sports business was an amalgamation of a number of different other things called something relating to sports. It's become much more sophisticated than that. And when we talked about the long-term series, from facilities to asset value to tourism and hospitality to college to real estate, all of those issues, that's important. How does the diversity involved in all of these aspects help us come back from the unprecedented pandemic?
Sports has also always played a role in social activism and social awareness. You know, maybe Jackie Robinson should have happened decades sooner, but the fact of the matter is that in 1947, when he integrated Major League Baseball, it was still 7 years before Brown versus Board of Education, and it was 2 years before the armed forces became fully integrated. And, you know, this past summer, the actions of the NBA players and then later the WNBA players and the athletes from the other sports was a very powerful message that I think resonated across the entire country and will continue to play an important role.
And thanks for that. Really appreciate it. And I think your perspective will be invaluable as we continue to go through this series. Thanks for all that you do and really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rick.
Tom Ricketts is the executive chairman of the Chicago Cubs and longtime fan of the team. In 2009, he led his family's acquisition of the team from the Tribune Company. And when Tom and his family were introduced as the new owners of the Cubs, he outlined 3 goals for the organization. First, to win the World Series. That's obvious. That already happened. That's old news. Second, to preserve and improve Wrigley Field for future generations. Check that off the list on an ongoing basis. And third, to be good neighbors, giving back to the city and the team's North Side neighborhood. The Cubs won the 2016 World Series, named by Baseball America also as the organization of the year that year. And he's on the executive council of Major League Baseball. In his spare time, I guess you would say, he's also the chairman of In Capital LLC, which he co-founded in 1999. It's an investment bank with underwriting and distribution expertise in a wide range of securities, underwritten more than 400 billion of securities, corporate bonds, U.S. agencies, preferred stocks, CDs, mortgage-backed, structured notes, etc. AB in economics, MBA in finance from the University of Chicago. And I think it's probably fair to say the #1 Cub fan in the history of the world. Tom, how are you?
Great, Rick. Great to be on.
Thank you. Really appreciate you doing this. Appreciate all you do for Chicago. Appreciate all you do for baseball. How hard was it? All right, we'll cut to kind of the immediate chase now. We're starting pitchers and catchers. You're playing spring training games. How hard was it to organize spring training on such short notice? So what were the additional challenges, obviously, because of the pandemic and the uncertainty?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say it's great to be on this particular broadcast, both with you and with everyone from Foley. Foley was our counsel on buying the team. Gosh, almost 12 years ago now, and did a terrific job. And most days, I'm very happy with everything that happens at the Cubs. But back to your question. Well, it was pretty complicated. Going into the middle of January, there was a lot of talk about pushing spring training back a few weeks. The number of cases in Arizona were spiking, and the league and I agreed with it. Kind of felt it would have been a good idea to maybe delay the season a little bit, just to let the situation in Arizona kind of calm down a little bit. I mean, ultimately, the players decided it'd be better off to get started, and we had to do it on pretty short notice. So the logistics of getting 150 people down there right away, about 75 players and about 75 staff, was complicated. But then, just in putting in all the protocols, the league has a 100-page protocol, list of protocols for safety for the players and different procedures you have to follow. Various testing every other day, little devices people carry around to contact trace and all that. So it was complicated getting everyone in, and then it was complicated getting everyone to the park. I mean, we had to figure out all the pod seating. We sell out all of our games regardless of whether there's a limited supply or not. So managing expectations of all of our fans has been a challenge, but it's off to a great start. I give credit to our team down there. They've done a really nice job, and spring training is off and running.
So one of the added benefits with Foley is if you apply the but-for analysis and the successful search for you as the owner from the Tribune Company, they have a very small part in bringing the 2016 World Series championship to Chicago. So thank them and thank you. 99%. They have a little bit. So that's cool. You're a control person. You're a successful business person. From just getting on the field, you have federal, state, and local regulation issues. You've got your broadcast partners, your sponsors, your fans, the Players Association. You had to thread a variety of needles through the pandemic. How difficult is that? Who does that? Is it Crane? Is it you? Is it a combination of all the guys? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, we have a great team president in Crane Kenny, and he has a great staff. And so each of the people you just mentioned, each of the constituents in our model, we had a different strategy for last year, and just kind of worked through it. Sponsors are extremely important to us, all the different layers of government. This year, it's really been about dealing with the local elected officials, city and state rules about getting people back in the park. What MLB has said is that they will allow the number of people in your stadium that the local politicians or local regulations will allow. So everybody's kind of on their own to figure out what's the best situation for themselves. And we've worked closely with the city and the state. We do 20% starting on opening day. Hopefully that will grow over time, and hopefully by the end of the summer it'll feel pretty normal for everyone you just listed. So
I talked in my opening statement about the best practices sharing. How, as a practical matter, do you work not only with the White Sox, but all of the other pro teams in Chicagoland to share information relative to the pandemic?
Yeah, we certainly have collaborated with the White Sox and other teams locally. There's a president's group that gets together on a regular basis to talk about best practices. The league itself has done a nice job of giving us information on best practices, because when we reopen the ballpark, it's not just the number of seats. I mean, we're going to a touchless entry system, with new magnetometers by a company called Evolve that make it very easy to get in and out. We have, we're ticketless, no paper tickets to make it, less touchy, less transactional. Cashless on concessions has been a big challenge that we put in. And then all sorts of other things. But I think that the teams and the league have all collaborated pretty well to make sure everyone's up to date with what the best practices are, and everyone's putting them in place.
Everything's different. Little things like travel this year. How different is that going to be? Seemingly simple things on the road, like food service, for example. Everything is it's totally changed.
Well, the players got through it last year, but it was really very, very tight restrictions on what people can and cannot do on the road. Hopefully, at some point early in the spring here, we can get to a point that we can vaccinate the players and they can start to lead a more normal life as they travel. But right now, they get to the hotel, they stay in the hotel. They're not supposed to go out. They're not supposed to interact, and we have all those protocols still in place for the beginning of this season.
And a friend who's a Cub fan. By the way, I only associate with people who are Cub fans. I lived a lonely existence for a few years, but after 16, it became a lot easier. The fans, you've demonstrated your ticket refund distribution choice with the percent that are allowed in. His comment was, "You're very generous with it. It's kind of an award to the fans. You've given them some flexibility. You also, lost the ability to promote through the off-season caravan. Your fans are important, but I'm sure you're making up a lot of the rules as you go along, but primarily you're all about the fans and you want to preserve their trust."
Well, absolutely. And you want to stay communicating with them as much as you can. I mean, you mentioned we lost our off-season program. We usually have this Cubs convention where 10,000 people descend on a hotel in Chicago, and it's just a giant Cubs love fest. We couldn't do that this year. It was very disappointing. But we did come up with Cubs Unconvention, where we did a whole bunch of different things, where we replicated some of the better panels that we used to do at the convention and had giveaways and a kids session and a bunch of different other things. But fortunately, we have our own network, our Marquee Sports Network, so we can leverage that as a way to communicate with fans. We had a lot of original content that came out as part of the Unconvention, a lot of different things that can just help us stay in front of the fans and keep giving them information and keep them engaged throughout the off season. And then social media. We're very, very kind of ahead of the curve on the social media world. We try to do everything we can to touch everyone with respect to little bits of information or little clips of video or whatever we can do to just maintain that daily relevance. Now the season's starting. We'll have some content to put through those channels, and hopefully it'll start to feel a little more normal at some point this year.
Winning cures everything. There you go. Winning cures everything. One of the least important of your worldly credentials, one of the most important in my life, is shameless plug, the contributor to the Sport Business Handbook, which you helped write. Thank you very much for that. But one of the things that you said in there, you emphasized transparency as being critically important to connecting with your fans. How important has the message been during the darkest days of the pandemic and the associated comeback, just to be truthful with the fans?
Well, it's been tough because you don't really know, you don't have any great answers. Like the beginning of last year was really tough. Like, when are we going to play? When do we get our season ticket money back? How is this all going to work? We just didn't know for a long time. So we appreciate all the patience of all the fans who waited until we had good answers to give them. And it's been tough, but we over communicate with our fans on so many different channels and through the people in our ticketing department. We try to stay in front of everybody as much as we could, and in the public as well. And I do think that it's very important to stay transparent with your fans. It's not like they can't figure it out. Like if you're not telling them the truth, they're going to know pretty soon. So just be direct. Bring them under the tent, tell them what you're doing, and everything will work out.
One of the other important social things, almost finally, you noted in the book as well, that connecting with the community is critical to your success. You raise more than $10 million each year to help more than 135,000 Chicagoans by supporting organizations across Chicagoland. Is this undertaking even more difficult and important during the pandemic and beyond?
Yes and yes. More difficult because we raise a lot of that money through events. We had a big event last year that was scheduled for May that was going to raise us a big chunk of that money we give away. And then it was more important. I mean, right away when the pandemic took hold here in Chicago, we made large donations to the city and state funds that were addressing things on the front line. And one of the things we did is we turned Wrigley Field into the state's largest food pantry. Using the scale we had. And it not only did it, was it great because we had space, we had coolers, we had all the room for people to pack all the food. It was easy to get people in and out. We think we had a positive impact on the volunteers because it was so much more fun to come to Wrigley than to a warehouse somewhere else. But and we continued throughout. We did a lot of different things with PPE supplies and helping different neighborhood hospitals, pandemic specific type of responses. But hopefully this year we'll get back to some of our core programs and doing some of the things that really help kids throughout the city of Chicago.
Final question, Tom Ricketts. It's almost April. Do you have enough pitching?
Oh, we do. We're fine. I'm really pumped about this team. I really am. We won our division last year, which is a great accomplishment. But almost every guy had a down year. We really didn't have anybody playing at their best. So we think if all of the guys come back and they play like we know they can, we should have a pretty good chance of winning the division again. And we got plenty of pitching. We'll be all right.
So, ladies and gentlemen, here is Mr. Transparency. Take it to the bank. It's not a guarantee, but it's short of a guarantee. Tom, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick. Great to be here.
Thank you. Dr. John Fiore serves as the Director of Sports Medicine for the NBA, where he works with the league on research initiatives and the development and implementation of policies related to player health and wellness. Together with the NBA Junior, NBA, and USA Junior NBA and NBA basketball, he recently led the development of the first published guidelines for youth basketball participation. Serves as one of the 3 NBA members of the NBA National Basketball Players Association Wearables Committee and chair of the Strategic Advisory Board for the NBA and GE Healthcare Orthopedics and Sports Medicine Collaboration, and several other league community committees related to player health and wellness. Dr. Fiore also serves as the chief of the primary sports medicine service at Hospital for Special Surgery in New York, where he oversees the largest group of primary care sports medicine physicians in the U.S. And prior to joining, Dr. Fiore was chief of the UCLA Division of Sports Medicine, where he practiced for 23 years and was the head team physician for UCLA. Sir, it was great to hear those credentials. And the second part, given all that you do in frontliners during the pandemic, is a tremendous burden that you've had on behalf of Americans. So thank you very much for that.
Well, thank you for the very kind introduction. And thanks to John, Kevin, and Bob for inviting me to speak with you guys today.
Well, so describe your role, basically. I already tried to outline it, but before the pandemic and basically how it's changed since.
Yeah. In some ways it's the same. Our top priority is health and safety for our players, and that is a constant. Obviously, the focus of that has changed dramatically from, injury analysis, injury prevention, mental health. All those things are still really important, but the day-to-day has just been consumed by understanding this virus, trying to make sure that we are keeping our players, our coaches, our referees, all those that are involved with putting on the games safe on a day-to-day basis. And that's been a tremendous undertaking and has kept us busy pretty much 24/7 since March. Well, actually before that, even when we first learned of the first community spread back in Sacramento in February.
You obviously deal with the players, you deal with owners, but there's so many stakeholders since the Rudy Gobert shutdown March 11 situation. Yep. You got venue workers, you got players, you got the fans, broadcasters, others, and media. I'm not going to ask you to prioritize because that's not correct, but I assume you have responsibilities and obligations with and over all of those.
Yeah, like I said, getting that information, learning the science behind this virus, and as early on there was very little known about this virus, and the information was slowly coming, and then we were just searching and trying to share that information with everyone involved, with all the teams, all the league representatives, all of the owners and players, as well as all of those involved with putting on a game. And there's a large number of people involved. And so while we don't necessarily have direct management over each of those different groups of people, sharing that information with all of the league front office folks was essential to help them create strategies that were going to work for their employees and in their communities where there was varying implementation of public health measures across the country. And so that was part of the challenge. So yeah, we feel like we have a responsibility to everyone involved with the league and each team, each organization, and we do our best to work with them and collaborating, providing that scientific information and also access to our expertise across the board to try to help them make decisions.
The challenges are immense. You're getting through them. Will those challenges have a lasting impact on how things are done from a medical perspective when we exit the pandemic, hopefully sooner than later? Will it be different for players, fans, and others? For example, will teams have infectious disease specialists either on their payroll or on speed dial, for example?
Yeah. Well, what people don't know is as a team physician, like when I was at UCLA for all those years, you have a group of consultants that you work with that you're going to need. And infectious diseases was part of that. But I would say the level of need obviously has changed dramatically. So, you would expect that as we are able to quell the need for infection control with vaccination and, some of these other measures, the role of the infectious disease docs will be probably less of a high priority, but will continue to be ongoing. We've learned a lot about infection control that can help on a year-to-year basis with, influenza and other infectious diseases that we've seen, across the seasons, across the years. So yeah, I think we're going to have a big need for that, but probably not as prominent as what we have now. And I think as Mr. Ricketts was saying, about venues and touchless, operational techniques and learning how to use those things is going to be an ongoing benefit, I think, to our players and fans. One of the things I think that's been not probably remarked upon enough in the media is how little influenza has impacted us this year. And as you think about it, influenza is a big year-to-year event. It affects all of our, all of us. But there's been much less influenza this year because of all the infection prevention measures that all of us have been observing. And so I think that's a take-home message. I think the other thing I would point out is that there's been a great collaboration with our teams and our players on these issues. And perhaps one of the silver linings of this is to, as again, Mr. Ricketts mentions, the transparency of working through these difficult issues, I think builds a lot of collaboration and ongoing sort of goodwill that I think will carry forward as we move on in the future.
And you touched on the facility-related issues. We'll talk about that in April and again in May. But one of the interesting things is architects all over the world are scrambling for safe stadiums of the future, safe renovations, the touchless, the food service, the ingress, the egress, restaurants for the long for as well, and maybe just to plant the seed as the $1.9 trillion coronavirus recovery bill is signed, and next we shift to infrastructure. It's interesting that with facilities, you may have infrastructure development and coronavirus protection in the same area. Another topic for another day. But how do you predict all that coming together in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think technology is really developing. One of the things we spent a lot of time looking at was, the sort of ventilation of the arenas. And there was some variability. The newer arenas had tremendous ventilation systems. And I think those kinds of things, those engineering advances, I think they will be, adapted moving forward across the board in some way, shape, or form. I think the idea of having, sort of a biological passport, where, things like vaccination status, because we know coronavirus is going to keep coming back. It's going to be a matter of how much it's going to impact us on a year-to-year basis. But I think having those biological passports and things like that will really help us, guide the future with this. And I think fans are going to feel good about coming to arenas and stadiums knowing what's been done. I don't think they quite fully appreciate the effort that organizations and arenas have taken on their behalf. And I think it's going to make them feel pretty good about attending events.
And I remember a Seton Hall study that was done in April. We used to talk about that 71% of the people surveyed, avid fans, said they wouldn't go back to a stadium until vaccines have been found. Now we've got vaccines that are ramping up, but yet we've got some variant concerns. What are the current sources of information that you deal with on the variant side to set long-term policy? Got to be frustrating. Got to be difficult.
Yeah. It's a little daunting. So we have a group of experts in infectious diseases, virology, and epidemiology. We've actually had conversations with a number of people throughout different levels of government. And our concern is that some of these variants may impact the efficacy of the vaccines. We don't know for sure. We're hopeful that perhaps what we see in the lab is not what we're going to see in practice. And as we get more and more people vaccinated, hopefully it'll become much less of an issue. But I think the jury is still out on that. And I think that's why the CDC and others have been a little cautious with some of the relaxation of some of the precautionary measures that vaccinated people still have to take. And so that I think we're going to be seeing more of that. Some of the early literature coming out of Israel and other places has been encouraging. And we're hopeful that, vaccination will play a large role in ensuring a level of protection and comfort for folks venturing out to gatherings.
Doctor, final question for you, and it dominates some of the sports headlines these days. The California comeback rules with the purple districts and the red districts, New York coming back in certain cases, Mr. Ricketts and the 20% policy, different strokes for different folks. Are you comfortable of the processes that teams are going through with government help and otherwise where the decisions are made primarily for fan safety and not for other reasons?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a difficult environment because it's not even at the state level; it's at the local Department of Public Health level, and some are quite restrictive, and it's not always parallel to what you see in other areas. So I think it's difficult for teams and ownerships to navigate that sometimes. We at the league office, we have a whole group of people that is simply focused on working with local governments to try to navigate this with teams. And I think having that dialogue is really important. If you have that dialogue, I think it gives, arenas and owners and teams an opportunity to be a little bit more flexible, so to speak, I wouldn't say flexible, but navigating this becomes a little easier. There's an understanding of what lengths arenas and organizations are going to protect fans that may not be apparent to the public health authorities. And so it is difficult, it's challenging, and there is a little bit of that, well, how come it's okay in one county but not the next? And hopefully we're going to get to a place where there's some general understanding of what can be done in these arenas that is safe with a lot of the technology and prevention measures that I think most teams are going to great lengths. And I don't think a lot of the public understands the level of sincere concern that all of us have for people attending these events. So hopefully that will, as time goes on, these things roll out, it will become a little less frustrating to navigate all that.
It's very clear after hearing you that the NBA and sports in general is in good hands, having you being involved in this process. John Fiore, NBA Director of Sports Medicine, thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Donald Dell, co-founder of the Association of Tennis Professionals and the founder of ProServe, leading sports agency that represented hundreds of star athletes across many sports, getting his start with some of the top tennis players in the 70s and 80s, including Arthur Ashe, Stan Smith, Jimmy Connors, Yvonne Lendl, and others. Former captain of the U.S. Davis Cup tennis team, youngest U.S. winning Davis Cup tennis team captain ever, founder of the Legg Mason Tennis Classic, television tennis commentator, elected to the International Tennis Hall of Fame in 2009. Same year, he wrote Never Make the First Offer Except When You Should, Wisdom from a Master Dealmaker, three-time All-American tennis player at Yale, reaching the NCAA singles final in 1959, played on two U.S. Davis Cup teams, captain of the winning Davis Cup team in 68 and 69, received his law degree from the University of Virginia, and served as special assistant to Peace Corps founder Sergeant Shriver in 68 through 69. Donald Dell, that's a heck of a series of credentials. How are you?
Hey, Rick, I'm fine. Thanks to be on the show with you.
Well, and maybe most important, another Sports Business Handbook contributor. Thank you very much for your friendship and your vision throughout this process.
Well, I think you did a great job in putting that together, and I think it's a good handbook for people who want to get interested in sports and the business of sports and the backgrounds of sport, all wrapped into one.
I appreciate it. When does Virginia play in the ACC tournament? Tomorrow? The next day?
I think they play tomorrow. Yeah.
All right.
And
so
they're the number one seed this year in the ACC because they won their last match.
Yeah, I know we had to get that in. So we have a little bit of time to spend here. Certainly, we're going to stop before tomorrow. What are some of the special challenges that face individual athletes? You know tennis, but golf would be in the same situation during the pandemic and the associated comeback.
Well, I think they're very different. I think team sports, football and basketball, have a much greater problem than golf or tennis, which are individual, and many of the major events in golf and tennis are all outdoors. So I just saw a note from the head of the ATP for tennis, Galdenzi, over in London, announced that they had $650 million last year put on the tour, even though it was cut way back. So tennis has been very strong. Golf continued most of last summer because it was outdoors, but indoors for the football and the basketball, they've had enormous protocols trying to keep everybody healthy. And I think it's been a interesting difference because, when you have 53 or 55 players on one team in the NFL, that's much harder to protect against and control. And they're all older, they're married, they have children, they're pros. And so it's harder to control everything. Whereas in the NBA, to my astonishment, Adam Silver had them all go down to Orlando, put them in one big hotel, and kept them there for about 6 weeks. And I don't think they had many outbreaks as long as people, and they were very, at the beginning, I was told, the players were very severely fined if they left the hotel without permission. And so I'm sure that was a lot of give and take back and forth with the Player Association. But I think the end result with the NBA during 2020 was quite remarkable.
One of the things we said in the opening statement before you got on was that the pandemic, one of the positives was a confirmation that we were all in this together. I think one of the interesting things with the athletes, that there was really a sense of universal and mutual obligation that they better take care of themselves because they're messing around with the whole league.
Exactly.
Let's talk economics for a minute. How can events recover from the significant economic losses of 2020 as we move forward to 2021?
Well, I think we got a couple of things that are really a problem, Rick, and that is how do you deal with what I'm going to call the fluid fan? I think you're going to find this year, as soon as things start to open up normally again, I think you're going to find that the fans are going to be very suspicious coming back, and you're going to have some problems getting the same quota of fans. Initially, I think there'll be a big outbreak. They'll want to come back, particularly in college football, which has been handicapped so long, and it's a big revenue sport for colleges. But picture just for a moment, if you're going to the U.S. Open in New York, you're going to have some kind of system where they can check you out as you go through. And those stadiums are enormous there. They're going to draw 50,000 people. And the football stadiums are going to, some places, Tennessee, Alabama, Kentucky, they're in the $100,000 seat range. Those are going to be enormous problems of how the owners, in this case the colleges, or the owners in the NBA or the NFL, how they deal with the people coming back. Because I don't think the virus, the variants, I don't think it's going to be totally over. I think it'll be much better all taken care of, but it's not going to be finished.
And it's moving in the right direction. You were a special assistant to Peace Corps founder Sergeant Schreiber in your early days. How important do you think athletes' responsibility is for philanthropy? There you are, teams, events, and otherwise, but clearly in the economic times of the pandemic, where do you think the role of athletes is in philanthropy?
Well, I think it's very interesting what's happened to the athletes. The salaries and the payouts have been so much greater in, let's say, the last 10 years. They've been enormous. And as a result of that, I think more and more players feel a real debt to give some of it back, particularly to their colleges. A lot of the athletes, when they first sign a big contract, many of them think, what can I do for my family? What can I do for my mother or my father?
Yeah.
And they either, if they come from a impoverished background, they buy them a home. But I think now more and more the athletes are starting to you saw that in the Black Lives Matter thing with the George Floyd situation. I mean, that was just such a shock to the country. And the athletes all took very strong positions on that. But I think as an offshoot, they are becoming much, much more philanthropic in their thinking. And I think that's for two reasons. Number one, they're much more socially conscious than they've ever been together. And secondly, the money has gotten so enormous. I mean, for example, yesterday, a guy named Dak Prescott, a quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, signs a 4-year contract for $160 million. Well, remember, he gets a tax write-off every time he gives a charity contribution. So he's probably certainly in the 45-50% tax bracket. So I think you're going to see more and more of teams and players contributing than ever before. I think there's a sense out there, there's a feeling of give back and helping others, which we've never had before. And because the salaries are so high, it makes it relatively painless for these players to do that.
Two quick things from the book. So comment first, you wrote that obviously 9 steps of the deal is a very important premise of yours. It's been in your book. You favored it, you had the comments in mind. These include preparation, listening, personality, honesty, and others. How do you think the pandemic is affecting or has affected the art of the deal?
Well, I think in some ways it's been easier. In other ways, it's been much harder. When you're virtual, you're never face to face, but you can look at each other, but you're not in person with them. For example, Rick, I teach a law course in sports law at the University of Virginia Law School, and we've been virtual now for 2 years. And there's no sense back and forth communication with the individual student as well. There's not a sense of satisfaction on both sides, and I do think that's really what's happening in sports. That when you're negotiating, if it's a big deal, you never want to negotiate on the phone or by email or text. I mean, you have to do it in person. And of course, we've lost that for the last, 14 months or so. So if there's any way that you can get before somebody, and I think with the vaccinations, that's going to happen in the next 4 or 5 months, you want to negotiate big deals if you can in person. So the fact that you have to do it virtually, I think, hurts you. On the other side of that coin, with virtual, everybody seems to be at home and they answer their phone. So it's much easier to communicate and reach the people you want to deal with. But I think the negotiating period and style and methodology is much harder virtually. I really do. You could have a picture where you're seeing each other, but that's not the same thing as sitting down in a room with somebody. And I believe, and I've written this many times, it's all about personal feelings. It's all about personal skills, people skills, is what I call it. Those are really the good negotiators, the people that listen before they try to talk or negotiate. And so I think your relationships with people over the years are very, very important. And it's very hard to do that new on a virtual situation.
I think absolutely. If we, based on people working out of their house, if we took a poll about how many people really have worn a business suit in the last 6 months, we'll have a very interesting reaction to that. Donald Dell, thank you very much for your perspective. Really appreciate it.
Rick, it's a pleasure, as always.
Kyle Sanborn, who is the VP of Marketing for Enterprise Holdings. He oversees media, creative, sponsorship, content, social, and a portfolio of brands in North and South America, Latin America, Caribbean, and Asia. Enterprise Holdings, as you know, it's Enterprise Rent-A-Car, National Car Rental, Alamo, Enterprise Fleet, Enterprise Truck Rental, Enterprise Car Share, all have unique audiences, brand positions, customer journeys, communication, digital products, and sales cycles. Kyle, thank you. Do you keep them all straight?
I try to. Yeah, thank you for having me today.
The job. You better keep all straight.
I know, right?
You guys have made a big commitment in sports. Look right behind you. That's a magnificent building. How's the pandemic changed your approach to activation, both in the immediate term and in the long run?
Sure. So I think immediately when the pandemic hit, everybody was scrambling. We were losing money as a business. Every business seemed to be losing money in some way or another. And we approached the activation side to say, what's right for right now? As things were closing down, what's right for our brand? What's the right message to be putting out there? And we really settled on a few key components that have become these pillars throughout this time that's just gone on way longer than we anticipated. So we focused on flexibility in our contracts, in the way we get value out of those, and really leveraged on leveraged great partnerships that myself and the team spent so much time building over the years, and those really started to pay off when this happened. So flexibility was a big one. The second one, as we think about building trust and confidence, so much of what Enterprise Holdings represents is travel, in the travel vertical. And that's what got shut down really hard, travel, entertainment, things like that. And we had to build trust back in our brand. So understanding what our messages were to build consumer confidence in then doing business with us was key. So those components were the immediate, and we see those still today, this flexibility of from open to close of, the next, vaccines rolling out versus what's the next strain that may hit us. We're just really flexible and conscious of what's appropriate to be pushing. And it's not always telling people to get out and travel. It's more of, and we, for Enterprise, coined the term, when you're ready, we're ready, because we want people to feel comfortable in that.
It takes a lot to coin a term that allows people to defer revenue for a while until they're ready to travel. But I guess transparency and the brand message is more important in terms of building long-term trust.
Well, long-term trust is key. I mean, in North America, usually the US and Canada specifically, Enterprise of all car rental companies is held as the most trusted. And that has been key, along with the differentiation of us not only being at airports. What we call our home city network or off airport was key to the road trip, which is alive and well for both business and leisure. And that footprint off airport really was a huge differentiator for us in that, from when you think about deferring revenue and looking at that. Yeah.
So you talk about the messaging and people not traveling as much as they did. The beauty of your commitments are you're diverse. You have a lot of deals with teams. You have a lot of deals with in each city and leagues. But it requires you, I would suspect, in the normal course of robust, mature marketing, to tell some different stories in different locations, different demographics, different teams. That's harder to do now because of the pandemic. You're not able to get out there and establish trends on the ground like you might have before.
Yeah, that's true. We were somewhat fortunate that a lot of our assets were, as we think about TV broadcast and streaming and whatnot, where the value was really driven from the TV visible or video visible assets, and then activation. Truly, when we're engaging at the local level with the fans of a specific team, we had to evolve slightly because either events weren't happening or it wasn't appropriate. So as we go back to those pillars of trust and confidence, like what are we saying? Are we trying to push people to an event, even if it's open? And then we've got to follow all these distancing rules. Is it the right thing to do for our brand? And at that time, to really get the value out of it, because the expense is still there. It was a question of, can you get the value with a fifth of the attendance or whatever the numbers were at the time. So a lot of evaluation went into that. It was an easy decision in some because we didn't have one to make because things were closed down. There was no attendance. As this opens back up, we love it. We can't wait. We want to engage, but that evaluation still takes place of it's a lot of money to get an activation on the ground started. And is it appropriate for the business given the audience levels that can engage with it?
And the activation clearly requires a whole degree of creativity. I was going to use the word nimbility, except it's not a word. And the bottom line of all of this is that you have to create some contingency plans that change in many ways, given what the local health requirements are relative to fans and facilities. And activation, I know, is something that's really important to you long term. Do you have a best, middle, worst case on every plan now, let's say for the next few months?
Yeah. We've started looking really far out, and we do look at those three scenarios. If things were to start to close again, what's the game plan? We're calling this the middle state of some countries, some parts of our country are opening up again more than others. How do we appropriately deal with that? And then when things are really ramping, we need to have a lead time. We can't decide to be ready when things are ready. We need to be ready a couple months in advance. So we'll be preparing communications, preparing assets so that we can adapt accordingly by region, by partner, and by the sentiment of consumers.
The final interesting question, I guess, is going forward. You, I assume, plan your budgets, you plan your corporate contacts many, many years out. You got planning cycles as well, but yet a lot of the pandemic calls for you to say what's going to happen next Thursday. How do you reconcile?
Yeah, you know what? A real shout out to our management who has put a ton of trust in the marketing department to be flexible with our budgets. And what we had to put together a budget. Absolutely. We look at a fiscal year and, looking to next fiscal year already starting right now. And we've just earned the trust to say, well, we're going to be very responsible in our investments. We're going to report on the progress of those, but we have to have money available when certain segments come back on. You read through all the different modes of transportation and way that we diversification we have in our business. Those are all coming at different paces back. The B2B side of things is huge. We're providing trucks and cars like we never have before, and then the road trip alive and well. We've got to be able to dial things up and dial things down from an investment standpoint, whether that's creative or media or partnerships accordingly. And our business has really given us that trust and flexibility to do that.
Kyle Sanborn, thanks to you and people in the industry broadly defined for remaining flexible and creative during the pandemic, keeping the money flowing, which is also important for everybody. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, folks, we're kind of at the end. I really am honored that you would participate in this event. Thank Bob Dupay for helping hatch this idea. We'll turn it over to the guys at the practice group to talk at the end of this. But you learn a lot of different things for an event like this. You realize that everybody really is in it together. You realize that the pandemic has some positive aspects to it, given all of the horrendous backdrop, and you realize that this is a constant learning process. It's a $1.3 trillion business of sports, we've thought, but many say that it's now a $900 billion business, and it'll get back to where it should be. We're learning as we move forward on a monthly basis. We'll deal with the entire industry and its affiliates, the real estate, the tourism, the hospitality industry. We'll deal with infrastructure as it relates to facilities. Hopefully we'll combine some news, and we may be able to break some with industry trends as well. I know that there were some people, you work the bugs out with this stuff. First time I've run one of these, and you had some people who were on and off. Mary, thank you for trying to figure out how to get people whose faces were on and off early. We'll get that improved next time. Overall, hope you really, really appreciated what we have to offer, and we're not done. We will continue to do this down the road on a monthly basis with a variety of other topics. Thanks again for attending. Turning it over to the Foley Sports Industry Practice Group, John Israel and Kevin Schultz.
Thanks, Rick. And thanks to all of our speakers, Tom Ricketts, Dr. John Fiore, Donald Dell, and Kyle Sanborn. I think that was a great program. And obviously thanks to you, Rick, and to Bob for setting it up and playing an integral role in putting this all together. Thanks also to everyone who attended this. We hope you can make future ones. And John, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, and I echo Kevin. Thank you all for being here. The speakers were great, and really we're just getting started. And I think Rick's sort of touched on it. Bob's touched on it. We're really going to be digging in on some of the topics coming in the next few months, focusing in on facilities and venues. In the next two programs, we're going to really take a hard look at development and redevelopment, what that means, engineering, architecture, how to focus, how this pandemic may change focus in building out and restructuring venues, and then of course looking at operations. So we're gonna really dive in. Today was a great start, and we really appreciate you all being here, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon.